Tobias Grant's life was extinguished not in a dark alley, but on a night that should have heralded boundless joy. In France, wedding celebrations are meant to be the dawn of a shared journey, a moment shimmering with laughter, heartfelt pledges, and the deep conviction that enduring affection triumphs over everything. But in a lavish penthouse suite high above the twinkling lights of Paris, that sacred commitment was violently broken by a man who had no right to be there. A man the groom considered a brother, a man who had stood faithfully at the altar, a man who had been silently calculating, waiting for his horrifying opportunity. This is the chilling account of how envy, a twisted fixation, and the ultimate betrayal warped a grand fate into a grim crime scene, and how the painful truth surfaced, layer by agonizing layer. Welcome to the Crime Thread. Your presence and support mean the world to me. For those just joining the channel, I post meticulously researched true crime stories multiple times a week. If you're captivated by the pursuit of justice, hit that subscribe button. It genuinely helps us honor these victims. To truly grasp the magnitude of what was taken, we must first appreciate the beauty of what existed. Before we examine the destruction, we need to witness the genesis of their love. Serafina Dubois and Tobias Grant were more than just names filed away in an official police dossier. They were two individuals who fought relentlessly against life's hardships to finally discover one another. Two kindred spirits who dared to believe that their bond could wholly rewrite the challenging narratives they'd been handed. And for a glorious period, it did. Serafina Dubois entered the world on July 10, 1996, in a cramped, multi-story building in Marseille, France, a district where the plaster was cracking and the wail of emergency sirens was a perpetual soundtrack. Her mother, only 16, was still grappling with her own existence, let alone the complexities of motherhood. Substance abuse quickly claimed her mother, a fate that often befalls young women burdened by too much agony and too little support. By the age of 4, Serafina's tante Cécile made a life-altering choice. She took Serafina in, raised her as her own flesh and blood, and provided the little girl with what her birth mother never could: security, discipline, and unconditional devotion. Tante Cécile labored double shifts as a pastry chef, returning home utterly spent, yet never too weary to check Serafina's schoolwork or carefully weave her braids before bedtime. She instilled in Serafina the wisdom that her beginnings did not define her end, that one could rise from scarcity and yet become an abundance of everything. Serafina internalized this. She earned top grades every term, not through ease, but by staying up late, studying diligently under the glow of a single lamp while other children were enjoying their youth. Her scholarship application essay, detailing her ambition to support children like herself, kids who desperately needed someone to champion them when the rest of the world had given up, moved the review board to tears. The University of Lyon granted her a full scholarship, and Serafina crossed that graduation stage in 2018, her tante Cécile weeping with pride in the audience, holding a sign that read, "Mon bébé a réussi, my baby made it." She graduated with a degree in child psychology. By 22, she was working at a youth mentorship clinic in a challenging quarter of Lyon, the very type of neighborhood she had escaped. Serafina stood at 168 centimeters with a dazzling, infectious smile that could instantly melt tension. The profound compassion in her eyes encouraged troubled adolescents to finally open up when they had closed off everyone else. Her colleagues often called it a natural gift, but Serafina would always correct them. It wasn't a gift, it was empathy forged by experience. On Sunday mornings, she lent her voice to the choir at her tante's cathedral, her singing soaring over the congregation, hymns of mercy and new beginnings, because she had lived that journey. During the week, she maintained a leather-bound diary, pages filled with reflections on her day, silent pleas for the children under her care, and aspirations she was still hesitant to voice aloud. She collected classic French jazz vinyl, the kind her tante used to play, Edith Piaf and Charles Aznavour, spinning them on an ancient wooden turntable in her tiny apartment. Her closest friend, Isabelle, who had been her confidant since high school, would playfully tease her for being a wise old soul inhabiting a vibrant young woman's body. But Serafina didn't mind. She understood her essence. She knew what truly mattered. And more than anything, she yearned to replicate what her tante had created for her, a true home overflowing with affection, a family built on unshakable foundations, a cozy balcony where she could one day sit with her own children and tell them that they were capable of anything. Tobias Grant's beginning was vastly different, yet it led him to the exact same destination. Born October 5, 1994, in a solid middle-class district of Bordeaux, Tobias was raised in a household where both parents reliably punched the clock every single day. His father dedicated 25 years to the local railway service. His mother was a high school registrar who knew the name of every student and the history of every family. They weren't wealthy, but their lives were built on dependability, and that unwavering nature molded Tobias into the man he became. He reached 188 centimeters by the time he was a teenager, and on the soccer pitch, he was a force of nature. Coaches hailed him as a prodigy. Talent scouts flocked to his matches, and for a fleeting moment, Tobias believed that the European leagues might be his calling. He received a partial scholarship to a technical university in Nantes, playing for 2 years until a sudden knee ligament tear during his sophomore year reminded him that dreams rarely unfold precisely as planned. So, Tobias seamlessly pivoted. He completed his degree in finance in 2016, walked into an international logistics firm with a sharp resume and an engaging smile, and earned a promotion to regional operations manager by the time he was 24. His colleagues adored him because Tobias possessed a laugh that could brighten the dullest office. A knack for making every single person feel valued. He was unwaveringly loyal. The kind of man who would drop everything to help a friend move apartments or quietly cover a cousin's unexpected bill. He had 2 younger brothers who worshipped him, calling him whenever their cars broke down or their relationships hit a rough patch, because Tobias was a stabilizing force. That was his identity. He cherished the concept of brotherhood, valued the belief that the people you call family are the ones you would go to the ends of the earth for. And his closest friend since childhood, Julien Moreau, was paramount on that list. Tobias trusted Julien the way one trusts someone who has been a constant presence since the very beginning. Someone who knows your entire past because they lived it alongside you. But all of that, the loyalty, the brotherhood, the implicit trust, would tragically become the very instrument wielded against him. April 14, 2018. That's the exact date everything changed course. Tobias and Serafina met at a local charity gala, one of those heartfelt events where area businesses contribute to youth arts programs, and attendees mill about, pretending the complimentary fine wine isn't their primary motivator for attending. Tobias arrived late, delayed by a meeting run over. He stepped into the venue just as Julien was making his calculated approach toward a woman positioned near the silent auction table, Serafina. Tobias had no intention of interrupting. He was merely searching for his friend. But when his gaze locked with hers, an unexpected and profound connection occurred. They began talking, and the conversation became an unbroken flow. 6 hours later, they were still lingering in a small cafe down the street, their empty coffee cups forgotten, laughing uncontrollably at shared jokes that weren't even that hilarious, exchanging stories of their childhoods, their careers, their hopes. Tobias told her about his brothers. Serafina shared the strength of her tante Cécile. And somewhere within those 6 hours, they both realized they had stumbled upon something truly extraordinary. Their first proper date quickly led to a second, then a 10th, then too many to keep track of. By the close of 2018, they were utterly inseparable. Tobias proudly introduced her at family dinners, and his mother discreetly pulled Serafina aside to whisper, "N'abandonnez jamais celle-là, don't ever let this one go." Serafina brought him to her cathedral, and her tante Cécile watched them sit together in the pew, hands tightly intertwined, and knew her prayers had been answered. They moved into a cozy apartment together in early 2019, located halfway between their respective workplaces. Tobias would leave for his logistics job early, but never without a goodbye kiss for Serafina. She would return late from the youth center, emotionally spent, and Tobias would have a meal waiting, even if it was just simple takeout on paper plates. They openly dreamed of their future, the charming house they would buy one day, the children they hoped to raise, growing old together the way Serafina's tante and her late husband had. And then, in December 2019, on the rooftop terrace of the very building where they had first met, with delicate string lights casting a warm glow against the swirling snow, Tobias knelt down on one knee. His hands were visibly shaking. His voice cracked with emotion, but he asked her to be his wife. And Serafina said yes before he could even complete the proposal. She cried. He cried. And in that singular moment, the world felt completely perfect. They set the date for June 15, 2020, 6 months away. Just enough time to plan a celebration that was simple but deeply meaningful. They had no interest in an ostentatious, flashy wedding. They desired something intimate, something significant, surrounded only by the people who mattered most. Julian was at the very top of that list. Tobias asked him to serve as his best man, and Julian accepted instantly, without the slightest hesitation. Why wouldn't he? They were like brothers. At least, that is what Tobias believed with his whole heart. But what no one knew then, what absolutely no one could have anticipated, was that Julian had been harboring a crippling emotional weight since that fateful night in April 2018. Something he had meticulously concealed. Resentment, a desperate obsession, and the deep-seated conviction that Serafina had made the catastrophic wrong choice. That belief would fester and swell quietly over the next 2 years, feeding on every loving glance Serafina gave Tobias, every shared joke, every single moment Julian was forced to witness from the periphery. And by the time June 15, 2020, finally arrived, that toxic belief had metastasized into something far, far more sinister. But we are not there yet. Right now, Serafina and Tobias are simply two people deeply in love, planning a wedding, envisioning a life together. Right now, they remain blissfully untouched by the horror that is approaching. And perhaps that is the most agonizing element of this entire story. They had absolutely no idea that the man standing directly beside them, the man Tobias called his brother, had already decided that if he couldn't possess Serafina, no one would be allowed to keep her whole. Before we delve deeper into this unfolding tragedy, I have a quick request for you. If you are as emotionally invested as I am right now, if this narrative has already gripped your attention and you're compelled to find out what happens next, please take a second to smash that like button and consider joining the community by subscribing. Sharing this story with others who appreciate true crime helps ensure that the victims of these shocking events are never forgotten. And believe me, the next part of this case is something you absolutely cannot afford to miss. Now, let us continue with the dark reality of Julian Moreau. Every powerful story holds a figure lurking in the darkness, silently watching while everyone else basks in the light. Julian Moreau was precisely that figure. And for the vast majority of his life, he managed to convince everyone, even himself, that he was perfectly content with his role on the sidelines. But the painful truth is that certain individuals are simply not built to be bystanders. Some people spend years suppressing repeated rejection until one day the pressure becomes unsustainable. Julian Moreau was one such man. Born December 3, 1993, in the same neighborhood of Bordeaux where Tobias grew up, just 3 houses away. From the age of 7, riding bicycles down broken pavements and playing spirited soccer until the streetlights came on, they were inseparable. Tobias was the more outgoing of the two, the child everyone naturally gravitated toward, the born leader. Julian was the reserved one, the observer who hung back, the boy who laughed at Tobias's jokes and unquestioningly followed his lead. That dynamic functioned perfectly when they were children. But as they matured, as life began to dispense victories and disappointments, that dynamic morphed into something entirely different. Julian stood at 180 centimeters with a slender build, not quite as tall or inherently athletic as Tobias, and that physical disparity felt more significant to him than anyone else recognized. He possessed a quiet, unnerving intensity in his gaze, the kind that made people quickly look away if they held his eyes for too long. But most people didn't hold his gaze long enough to notice. On the surface, Julian presented as affable, supportive, and always available when someone needed assistance. He was the friend who always showed up, who never complained, who played his assigned role without causing any disturbance. But beneath that meticulously crafted exterior, Julian carried a profound internal burden most people never glimpsed. He struggled immensely with letting go. He found it nearly impossible to accept when things didn't proceed according to his expectations. And more critically, he had an overwhelming difficulty processing rejection, particularly from women he was attracted to. His parents finalized a messy divorce when he was 14. A harsh separation where his mother moved on quickly, remarrying within a year to a man Julian never managed to connect with. His stepfather wasn't deliberately cruel, but he was emotionally detached. Julian spent his adolescent years feeling like an outcast in his own home. His father relocated 2 regions away, sending birthday cards containing €20 notes, but never calling. So Julian leaned completely on the one relationship that remained constant, Tobias. Tobias's family welcomed him unconditionally, ensuring he had dinner when his own house felt hollow, including him in family vacations and holiday gatherings. That unwavering loyalty, that profound acceptance, became everything to Julian. It became his entire identity. Yet, deep fractures began forming long before anyone became aware. In high school, Julian mustered the courage to ask a girl named Amelie to a school dance. He spent weeks preparing, bought her a small bouquet, and rehearsed his speech. She gently turned him down, explaining she was going with someone else, his lab partner, a boy Julian considered a friend. Julian didn't make a scene. He smiled, claimed it was no problem, and then never spoke to either of them again. Not at graduation, not at later reunions. He completely erased them from his existence, as if they had been a figment of his imagination. His friends dismissed it as simple teenage pettiness. They didn't realize it was a devastating pattern. University life didn't unfold as Julian had hoped either. He enrolled at a local college with vague intentions of studying technology, but he dropped out after a single semester. He couldn't sustain focus. While Tobias was completing his finance degree and securing a stable management position, Julian was hopping between factory jobs, retail positions, and overnight stocking shifts, never staying anywhere longer than a year. By his late 20s, he was loading crates at a silent distribution center on the outskirts of the city, returning to a small, sterile apartment that felt more like a storage unit than a home. The furniture was minimal, but everything was fanatically organized. His garments hung in the closet strictly by color. His kitchen cabinets were meticulously lined with canned goods facing the same direction. Control, that was Julian's fundamental need. Control over the few aspects of his chaotic life he could still manage. His romantic history followed the same destructive, repetitive cycle. A woman would show even minor interest. They would go on a few dates, and Julian would instantly latch on. He would text incessantly, show up at her workplace unannounced, and begin discussing future commitments after just 2 weeks. And every single time, the woman would inevitably retreat. The breakups consistently shared the same core message: "You're rushing things. This is too intense. I need space." And each time, Julian would nod, claim he understood, and then spend weeks dissecting every conversation, desperately trying to pinpoint where he had erred. He never once considered that the problem was his own intensity. He always blamed them for failing to recognize his worth. In his rigidly skewed perception, they always made the wrong choice. They always made the wrong choice. But through all the turmoil and failures, Tobias remained a steadfast constant. Tobias invited him to social gatherings, introduced him to new acquaintances, and defended him when mutual friends, noticing Julian's growing intensity, began to pull away. Tobias believed in unshakable loyalty above all else. Believed that the people who had been there from the start deserved to stay there forever. And Julian understood this deeply. He knew Tobias would never abandon him. That bond became the one relationship Julian could rely on, the one connection that would never reject him. Tobias wasn't merely his best friend, he was his anchor. Without Tobias, Julian wasn't sure who he was, or if he even existed. So when April 14, 2018, arrived, when Julian invited Tobias to that community gala with a very specific, calculated agenda, he genuinely thought he was finally going to change his luck. He had been monitoring Serafina for weeks, tracking her routine, identifying where she volunteered, carefully engineering a moment where he could approach her organically. He had every detail mapped out. He would introduce himself, volunteer his help at the donation tables, and charm her with the practiced dialogue he had recited 100 times in his head. And perhaps, just perhaps, this time it would be different. This time, someone would finally choose him. But then, Tobias walked in late, and Serafina's entire attention shifted in a way Julian instantly recognized. He had witnessed it before, that immediate, undeniable spark, that profound connection between two people that leaves no space for anyone else. And once more, Julian became utterly invisible. He didn't make a scene. He smiled broadly. He told Tobias and Serafina they looked wonderful together. He played the role of the supportive friend, the encouraging wingman, the guy who was genuinely happy for them. But deep inside, something catastrophically shattered. Not loudly, not suddenly, but a silent, minute crack that would spread slowly and inexorably over the next 2 years. And while Tobias built a beautiful life with Serafina, while they fell deeply in love and planned their future together, Julian watched from his familiar vantage point. The sidelines, the shadows, the place where he had spent his entire existence. Except this time, he convinced himself that Tobias hadn't just found love, he had stolen something that was rightfully supposed to be Julian's. Before we proceed, I want to hear from you. Where are you tuning in from right now? Drop your city and country in the comments below. And if you followed this story all the way to this point, type, "I'm locked in," so I know who is truly absorbing every detail. Now, let's observe what unfolds when that silent, internal crack finally bursts wide open. Game Die: The Fateful Meeting, Unraveling the Tape. April 14, 2018. A Sunday evening in Lyon, France. The kind of crisp spring night where the air loses its winter chill and people begin to believe in new beginnings. The convention hall near the river was hosting one of those charity events that happen in every major city. The kind where corporate sponsors write checks to local youth initiatives and guests stand around with clear plastic glasses of rose, feeling virtuous about their attendance. Folding tables lined the perimeter, covered with sign-up sheets for mentorship programs and informational brochures. A hired DJ played unobtrusive, popular music in the corner, loud enough to drown out awkward silences between strangers attempting small talk, but not so loud as to impede conversation. This wasn't the sort of event that typically transforms destinies. Except that night, it did. Julian had meticulously planned this moment for weeks. Not the logistics of the fundraiser itself, but his calculated approach. He had first noticed Serafina Dubois at the youth mentorship clinic where she worked, noticing her with an intensity that caused him to start inventing reasons to be in that neighborhood. He would walk past during her lunch hour, observing her sitting on the front steps, quietly eating a sandwich and writing in that distinct leather journal she always carried. He memorized her routines, her schedule, which boulangerie she stopped at on Tuesday mornings. And when he saw the flyer for this gala, recognized that her organization was a featured sponsor, he knew this was his perfect moment. Casual. Natural. The kind of introduction that could evolve into something profound, provided he played his part flawlessly. He called Tobias on Thursday afternoon with an invitation carefully wrapped in the pretense of friendship. "Hey, this charity thing is happening Sunday night. Convention center. Could be fun, good for networking. You should come, man." Tobias hesitated, mentioning an early Monday morning flight. But Julian pressed just enough. "Come on, man. When was the last time we just hung out? Plus, it's for a great cause." And Tobias, being Tobias, loyal to his very core, agreed. Julian made zero mention of Serafina. He didn't mention he'd been thinking about her for weeks. He didn't mention that the entire evening's success hinged on an introduction he had flawlessly rehearsed in his head. Sunday arrived, and Julian was there early, 6:15 p.m., 45 minutes before the official start. He volunteered to assist with setup, hauling folding tables, arranging chairs, making himself quietly useful in the unassuming way he had perfected over the years. And when Serafina walked in at 6:30 p.m. wearing dark jeans and a soft cream turtleneck, her hair pulled back, her arms laden with poster boards, Julian was already in the ideal position. He helped her arrange the donation table, effortlessly making conversation about the pleasant weather and the expected attendance. She was gracious, genuine, the kind of person who held your gaze when she spoke and truly listened to your reply. Julian felt everything click into place. This is going to work. It is working. By 7:15 p.m., guests were beginning to trickle in. Julian strategically positioned himself near Serafina's table, helping her organize donation envelopes, making her laugh with a self-deprecating story about a loading error at his job. She laughed easily, lightly touching his arm when she found something funny, and Julian misread every gesture as confirmation. He was subtly guiding the conversation toward the crucial ask, the smooth transition from helpful volunteer to potential date. Just 10 more minutes of conversation, then I'll suggest grabbing a coffee this week. Simple. Direct. And then Tobias walked in. 7:23 p.m. Julian instinctively glanced toward the entrance and saw his best friend scanning the room, looking slightly lost. Julian was about to raise a hand and wave him over when he turned back to Serafina and found her staring in the exact same direction. Not just casually looking, staring. Her posture had subtly changed. Her complete attention had instantaneously shifted, and Julian followed her gaze back to Tobias, who was now walking toward them. Not because he saw Julian, but because he saw her. "Hey, man. My apologies for the delay. The traffic getting off the ring road was a nightmare," Tobias said, slapping Julian on the shoulder, still slightly breathless. But his eyes weren't on Julian. They were entirely on Serafina, and hers were locked on him. Julian watched it happen in real time. That spontaneous, undeniable chemistry people talk about but rarely witness firsthand. The way Serafina's polite smile transformed into a blindingly genuine one. The way Tobias forgot his mid-sentence apology because he had been completely distracted by her presence. Julian heard his own voice making the introductions. "Tobias, this is Serafina. She works at the youth center. Serafina, this is my best friend, Tobias." The words came out effortlessly, friendly. But inside, Julian felt a terrible rupture. He had observed this scenario countless times before, the precise moment when someone he deeply desired chose someone else, without even realizing he had been an option. Serafina extended her hand. Tobias took it, holding it a second longer than was strictly necessary, and they immediately started discussing her work, his job, their shared passion for improving opportunities for young people. The conversation flowed with a natural ease that Julian couldn't replicate even on his best day. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Julian tried to interject a few times, at a relevant point, remind them of his presence, but every attempt was politely acknowledged and then completely fell flat. At one point, Serafina suggested they should go sample the food before all the good petit fours were gone, and Tobias instantly agreed. They walked toward the buffet table together, and Julian stood rooted by the donation table, still holding a stack of envelopes, watching himself become utterly redundant. He watched Serafina laugh at a comment Tobias made, watched her lightly touch his arm the same way she had touched Julian's earlier, except this time, it clearly meant something profound. Julian stayed at the donation table, meticulously straightening envelopes that were already straight, playing his defined role. By 8:30 p.m., Julian watched Serafina jot her phone number onto a piece of paper and hand it directly to Tobias. "We should grab a coffee sometime. I'd love to hear more of your ideas." Tobias carefully folded the paper, slipped it into his jacket pocket, and grinned like he had just won the lottery. And he had. The evening Julian had meticulously planned, the introduction he had brilliantly engineered, the moment he had been building toward for weeks, had all culminated in Tobias receiving exactly what Julian coveted. And the cruelest part was, Tobias had no earthly idea. "Man, she is incredible," Tobias raved in the car on the drive home, his voice animated and energized. "I mean, did you hear about the work she's doing? I'm going to call her first thing tomorrow." "You think that's too soon?" Julian kept his eyes fixed on the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. "Nah, man. Call her tomorrow. You two seemed like a perfect match." The words tasted like ash in his mouth, but he spoke them anyway, because that is the mandatory performance of a best friend. Tobias talked the entire 20-minute drive home, replaying snippets of conversations, analyzing moments. Julian provided the required responses, short affirmations, encouraging nods, the perfect performance of a supportive friend. But his hands remained rigidly clenched in his lap when they weren't on the wheel. When Julian finally dropped Tobias off and drove back to his own silent apartment, the emptiness in the car felt unbearable. That night, Julian lay awake, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. He replayed every single second of the evening, every word he had said to Serafina, every smile she had given him before Tobias arrived. He tried desperately to isolate where he had gone wrong. But the stark truth was simpler, and far harder to accept. He hadn't done anything wrong. Serafina had simply chosen someone else, and Julian, once again, was left watching from the exterior. He retrieved his leather journal around 2 a.m. and scrawled 4 sentences that no one would read for 2 years. She was meant to be mine. I saw her first. I put in the effort. He doesn't even grasp what he took. Julian closed the journal, returned it to his nightstand drawer, and finally drifted into a troubled sleep just before dawn. And when he woke up, he made the calculated decision to do what he always did: smile, support his friend, and meticulously pretend everything was perfectly fine. December 14, 2019. Tobias called Julian at 11 p.m., his voice trembling with euphoria. I did it, man. I asked her. She said yes. Julian was sitting alone in his desolate apartment when the call came through, and for one fleeting second before replying, he felt every emotion inside him utterly freeze. Then, the pre-written script took over, the one he'd been reciting for the past year and a half. That's incredible, man. Congratulations. I am so happy for you. Tobias continued to talk, excitedly describing the rooftop proposal, the unexpected snow, Serafina crying and accepting before he could finish the question. Julian listened intently, providing all the correct, congratulatory noises. When the call finally ended, he sat in the dark, staring at his phone for another agonizing hour. 2 weeks later, Tobias invited him over for a celebratory dinner. Serafina cooked a magnificent meal. They uncorked a nice bottle of wine. And at the close of the evening, Tobias walked Julian to the door and spoke the exact words Julian had been anticipating. I need you to be my best man. You're my brother, man. I truly can't do this without you. Julian pulled him into a warm, immediate hug without a flicker of hesitation. It would be an honor. And in a deeply twisted way, it was. Being the best man meant being essential, being deeply needed, being a central component of something important, even if that something inflicted profound pain to witness. January 2020 brought the real planning phase. Serafina and Tobias set the date for June 15, a Saturday, giving them 6 months to coordinate a simple, elegant affair for approximately 150 guests at the Château de Bellefontaine, overlooking the stunning Rhône Valley. Serafina included Julian in surprisingly intimate ways. She texted him asking for his objective opinion on color palettes, invited him along for venue walkthroughs, and said things like, "You know Tobias better than anyone. Help me choose what he will adore." She truly wanted him to feel like a cherished member of their blossoming family. Julian accepted every single invitation. February meant venue visits. The 3 of them spent 2 entire weekends touring locations, and Julian watched Serafina's face illuminate when they first walked into the Grand Château de Bellefontaine. He stood right beside them when they signed the deposit check, offered heartfelt congratulations in the parking lot, and then drove home alone, constantly replaying how perfectly natural they looked together. March brought the cake tasting, where Julian sat opposite them, debating the merits of rich chocolate ganache versus delicate vanilla buttercream. He watched them playfully smudge frosting on each other's faces, laughed when Serafina hugged him and thanked him for sacrificing his Saturday. That 3-second embrace replayed constantly in his mind for days. April meant organizing the bachelor party. Julian booked a secluded villa in the Swiss Alps, inviting Tobias's closest friends, planning hiking and card games instead of a wild night, because he knew what Tobias genuinely preferred. On the final night, Tobias gave a heartfelt, slightly drunken speech, thanking everyone and specifically singling out Julian. "This man has been my brother since we were kids. I would absolutely not be the man I am today without him." Everyone raised their glasses, and Julian felt an unfamiliar sensation twist in his chest. It might have been genuine pride, or it might have been something darker he couldn't yet name. May brought the bridal shower, which Julian didn't attend, but he heard every detail when he helped Tobias shop for Serafina's gift afterward. They spent an hour debating between a high-end espresso maker and a stand mixer before Tobias settled on the espresso maker in her preferred color. At the checkout counter, Tobias's phone lit up with photos from the shower. Serafina surrounded by friends in a crisp white dress, absolutely radiant and laughing. "Look at her, man. I'm the luckiest guy alive." Julian agreed instantly, because what possible other response was there? The week preceding the wedding rushed by at breakneck speed. Suddenly, it was June, and the group chat was erupting with last-minute coordination questions. Julian answered everything efficiently, handling logistics like the supremely reliable best man everyone depended on. He confirmed vendor arrival times, collected the tuxedos, and reassured anxious relatives. He was indispensable, and he repeatedly told himself that had to count for something essential. June 13th brought the rehearsal dinner, held at the chateau. Julian arrived early, helped with the final setup, triple-checking details that were already flawless. When Serafina arrived at 5:45 p.m., she hugged him and whispered, "Thank you for everything, Julian. We truly couldn't have pulled this off without you." The rehearsal itself proceeded smoothly. Everyone practiced their positions, and Julian stood where he was supposed to stand, 3 feet from Tobias, watching Serafina practice her walk down the central aisle. Isabel, the maid of honor, stood directly across from him and noticed something unsettling in the way Julian watched Serafina. His jaw was too taut. His stare lasted an uncomfortable amount of time. She made a mental note, but said nothing. Dinner followed, featuring exquisite Provençal cuisine and fine wine. When it was time for the toasts, Tobias stood first, thanking his family and turning to Julian. "I asked this man to be my best man because he has been there literally since day one." Then Julian stood with his glass. "I've known Tobias since we were 7 years old. Some people just innately know what they are meant to have, who they are supposed to be with. Fate, as we know, operates in truly interesting ways. Sometimes we think we know how things should go, and life leads us somewhere entirely different. The fundamental thing is accepting what is beyond our power to change and wholeheartedly celebrating what is meant to be." To Tobias and Serafina. The table burst into applause. Tobias embraced him warmly. Serafina mouthed, "Thank you." No one caught the chilling undertones except for Isabel, who leaned toward Serafina afterward and whispered, "Is Julian all right? He seemed very intense tonight." Serafina glanced at Julian, who was laughing with the groomsmen. "He's probably just nervous about his speech on Saturday. He overthinks things. He'll be fine." The dinner wrapped up around 9:30 p.m. Julian helped clean up, drove home in suffocating silence, and sat on his bed, scrolling through the photos people had already posted online. He pulled out his journal and wrote one final chilling sentence under June 13, 2020, 2 more days. He closed it, lay down fully clothed, and slept poorly. Saturday morning, June 15th, dawned clear and magnificent. Julian arrived at the Château de Bellefontaine at 7 a.m., 3 hours early. He walked the empty venue, rechecking details that required no checking. The groomsmen arrived at 9:30 a.m., loud and relaxed. At 10:15 a.m., the bridal party van pulled up. Julian watched Serafina step out in jeans and hair rollers, surrounded by her bridesmaids. She waved across the lawn. "Morning, Julian. You look fantastic." He waved back, watched her vanish inside, and retreated to the groom's suite where Tobias was pacing with nervous, joyful energy. By 3:30 p.m., every chair was filled with guests. The string quartet was gently warming up. At 3:50 p.m., the wedding coordinator knocked softly. "It's time." Julian lined up next to Tobias, meticulously adjusted his tie one last time, put on the warm smile he had perfected over 2 years, and prepared to escort his best friend toward the altar, where Serafina would soon be waiting. 4 p.m. The string quartet transitioned from warm-up exercises to the majestic processional melody, and 150 people respectfully rose to their feet. The chateau's garden looked exactly like the dream Serafina had described 6 months prior. White chairs lined in perfect rows. The floral arch overflowing with deep crimson and ivory roses. delicate string lights already twinkling, though the sun wouldn't set for hours. The temperature was a comfortable 25 degrees Celsius, with just enough breeze to keep the air fresh. The Rhône Valley stretched quietly in the background, reflecting the late afternoon light. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The bridesmaids entered first, for women in elegant crimson gowns, walking slowly down the white runner stretched between the chairs. Isabel came last as maid of honor, holding her bouquet steady. Then the groomsmen, 3 of Tobias's friends from university and work, all in sharp charcoal gray tuxedos with crimson ties. Julian walked forth, just ahead of Tobias. As he made his way down the aisle, he caught the eye of Serafina's Tante Cecile in the front row. She smiled at him genuinely, the same warm smile she had offered him dozens of times over the past 2 years. Julian smiled back, nodded slightly, and took his predetermined position at the front. Then came Tobias. The officiant gestured for everyone to remain standing, and Tobias walked down the aisle alone, just a man moving toward the single most important moment of his life. He looked composed, yet a palpable nervous energy radiated from him. When he reached the front and turned to face the aisle, Julian saw him surreptitiously wipe his sweaty palms on his trousers, saw him take a deep, stabilizing breath. Julian stood 3 feet to his right, the traditional best man position, with an unobstructed view of everything. The music shifted. The stirring opening notes of the bridal march filled the air, and every head turned toward the back. Serafina appeared at the far end of the aisle on her Uncle Jean's arm, and even from 20 meters away, she was breathtaking. The elegant lace gown fit her flawlessly, an off-shoulder neckline and an A-line skirt that flowed like liquid. Her hair cascaded in loose, romantic curls, with small white flowers carefully tucked throughout, and she carried a stunning bouquet of crimson and ivory roses. Her smile was radiant, the kind of pure, unadulterated joy that validates every wedding photographer's fee. She looked impossibly beautiful, deliriously happy, and completely certain of the choice she was making. Tobias began to cry immediately. His hand instinctively went to his chest, over his heart, and tears streamed down his face before Serafina made it halfway down the aisle. He made no attempt to compose himself, simply stood there openly weeping, watching the woman he loved walk toward him. His mother in the front row was crying, too. Half the guests were reaching for tissues before Serafina even reached the front. Julian watched it all. From his position 3 feet away, he had a perfect, horrifying view of Tobias's emotional breakdown, Serafina's approach, the entire sacred moment unfolding exactly as it was intended. His expression remained neutral, appropriate, the look of a supportive best man. But his jaw was clenched tightly enough to ache, and the smile plastered on his face felt synthetic, frozen in place like a suffocating mask he couldn't possibly remove. He watched Serafina's uncle kiss her cheek and carefully place her hand in Tobias's. He watched them stand facing each other, hands clasped, tears still streaming down Tobias's face. The ceremony followed a classic structure, interwoven with personal, heartfelt touches. The officiant spoke about how Serafina and Tobias met, about the journey that had culminated in this moment. Then came the profound vows. Serafina went first. Her voice shook slightly at the beginning but steadied beautifully as she continued. Tobias, before I met you, I never knew love could feel safe. I didn't know it could be calm and certain instead of chaotic and confusing. You taught me that love doesn't have to hurt, that I deserve to be chosen, not just today, but every day. You've shown me what true partnership looks like, what deep respect feels like. I choose you today, and I will choose you every day for the rest of my life. The crowd offered soft sounds of appreciation. Tobias wiped his eyes, laughed at his own excessive tears, and began his vows. Serafina, you walked into my life when I wasn't even looking for anyone. And you fundamentally changed everything. You made me strive to be better, to do better, to show up completely instead of just drifting along. You've taught me the meaning of unconditional commitment, what grace truly looks like. I choose you today and every day thereafter. No matter the challenges we face, you are my person. You are my home. And I promise to spend the rest of my life ensuring you never doubt that. More tears erupted from the crowd. Serafina was now crying too, happy tears that slightly blurred her mascara. The officiant allowed the moment to breathe, giving them space to simply gaze at each other, and then moved into the crucial ring exchange. Julian reached into his pocket and produced Tobias's ring on cue, placing it carefully in the officiant's outstretched palm. Isabel did the same with Serafina's ring. Simple, classic white gold bands, engraved on the inside with their wedding date, June 15, 20. Tobias slid Serafina's ring onto her finger first, his hands still trembling slightly. Then Serafina took Tobias's ring and did the same, her voice now steady with emotion. The officiant smiled warmly, looking out at the congregation. "By the power vested in me by the state of France, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Tobias, you may kiss your bride." Tobias didn't wait for the sentence to finish. He pulled Serafina toward him, one hand on her waist and the other tenderly cradling her face, and kissed her with a consuming passion, as if they were the only two people left in the world. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause and cheers, people standing and clapping, everyone celebrating the official moment that sealed their marriage. The kiss lasted significantly longer than typical ceremony kisses. Tobias and Serafina finally broke apart, laughing, their foreheads pressed together, completely lost in their overwhelming happiness. Julian clapped along with everyone else, his hands coming together in that same mechanical rhythm from the ceremony, his face maintaining that frozen smile. The officiant presented them to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time anywhere, Mr. and Mrs. Tobias and Serafina Grant." More applause, more cheers. The string quartet launched into the joyful recessional music, and Tobias and Serafina walked back down the aisle together, his arm firmly around her waist, both of them beaming at their guests. Julian followed in the recessional with Isabel, offering his arm as they had practiced during the rehearsal. She accepted it with a friendly smile, and they walked down the aisle behind the newlyweds at the appropriate, measured pace. When they reached the back, the wedding party veered off toward where the photographer was setting up for formal photos. The guests mingled, heading toward the lavish cocktail hour space where servers circulated with Kir Royale and delicate hors d'oeuvres. The next hour was dedicated to photos. The photographer worked with practiced efficiency, gathering the wedding party for large group shots, then breaking into smaller, specific configurations. Julian stood where he was instructed to stand, smiled when prompted, and adjusted his position for better composition. He appeared in dozens of photos that day, always either slightly in the background or off to the side. In the shots where he stood directly next to Tobias, his smile looked wholly genuine. The camera captured exactly what he wanted it to capture. But in the fleeting moments between shots, when the photographer reviewed images or adjusted settings, Julian's eyes relentlessly sought out Serafina. She was luminous, glowing in a way that had nothing to do with cosmetics or lighting. She laughed effortlessly, constantly leaning into Tobias, kept reaching for his hand, even when they were supposed to be posing separately. This was her day, the culmination of everything she had dreamed about, and she had chosen Tobias to share it with. The photographer finally called wrap on the formal photos at 5:45 p.m., dismissing the wedding party to join the cocktail hour for the last 15 minutes before dinner service. Julian walked toward the elegant courtyard where guests were mingling and laughing. He ordered a straight scotch from the bar, drank half of it in one gulp, and found a vantage point at the edge of the crowd where he could observe without being forced to participate. The ceremony was over. The sacred vows were spoken. Serafina was now officially Serafina Grant, legally and irrevocably bound to Tobias in a way that could not be undone. Julian finished his scotch and signaled the bartender for another, his mind already churning ahead to the many, many hours still remaining in this torturous, endless day. The reception hall looked like something ripped from the pages of an architectural magazine. Thousands of string lights crisscrossed the vaulted ceiling, casting a warm, honeyed glow over the round tables dressed in ivory linens with deep crimson napkins folded into perfect peaks. Centerpieces of roses and candles sat elegantly on each table, luxurious but tastefully restrained, precisely what Serafina had always envisioned. The DJ booth was situated in one corner. The large dance floor stretched empty and waiting in the center, and massive floor-to-ceiling windows along one side offered a spectacular view of the valley as the sun began to set. 150 guests located their assigned seats, settled in with fresh drinks from the open bar, and the energy was vibrant, celebratory, that perfect moment at a wedding where the formality is complete and the real party is about to ignite. At 6:15 p.m., the DJ's voice boomed over the sound system. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome for the first time anywhere, Mr. and Mrs. Tobias Grant." The hall erupted in applause as Tobias and Serafina appeared triumphantly in the doorway, hands clasped and raised high. They made their way to the head table, pausing to embrace relatives and accept warm congratulations, taking their time because this was, unequivocally, their night. The DJ allowed the applause to subside before making the next announcement. And now, the couple's first dance as husband and wife. The opening, soulful notes of "Ovi" by Nat King Cole filled the hall, and Tobias led Serafina to the center of the dance floor. He pulled her close, one hand on her waist and one holding hers, and they swayed together, utterly engrossed in each other while every single person watched. Serafina rested her head on his shoulder. For 3 uninterrupted minutes, they existed in a universe built only for them. Julian watched from his assigned seat at a table with the other groomsmen and their dates. His eyes remained fixed on the dance floor, on Serafina's white dress moving against Tobias's dark tuxedo, on the devastatingly natural way they fit together. When the song concluded and guests applauded, Julian clapped along, his hands coming together in the same cold, mechanical rhythm from the ceremony. Next came the parent dances. Serafina danced with her Uncle Jean, who had walked her down the aisle, to a classic French chanson. Then Tobias danced with his mother to a tender, heartfelt ballad. Both dances were deeply emotional, intimate moments that had half the hall reaching for tissues. Julian watched, finished his first scotch of the reception, and signaled a server for another. Dinner service began at 6:45 p.m. Servers moved with quiet efficiency, delivering plated salads, then the main course, slow-roasted lamb or pan-seared sea bass with seasonal vegetables. Conversations flowed easily. Guests compared notes on the ceremony and complimented the magnificent venue. Julian ate mechanically, responding only when someone asked him a direct question, but otherwise remaining silent. He switched from scotch to wine, then back to scotch. His glass was never quite empty because he kept refilling it at a speed that should have raised alarms for anyone paying attention. But no one was paying attention. Everyone was focused on the newlyweds, on the collective celebration, on their own conversations. At 7:30 p.m., the DJ announced it was time for the essential toasts. Isabel went first, stepping up to the microphone with her index cards. She began with a humorous story about meeting Serafina in high school, about Serafina's unparalleled ability to see the best in everyone. Serafina has endured things most people here can't imagine. She had every reason in the world to be guarded, to refuse to let anyone in, but she chose to remain open. She chose to remain kind. And when Tobias came into her life, I watched her finally comprehend what it looks like when someone loves you the right way. Tobias, you brought my best friend true peace. You made her feel secure. That is the greatest gift you could have ever given her. Glasses were raised across the room. Serafina was tearful again. Happy tears. Then, it was Julian's turn. He stood, adjusted his jacket, and walked to the microphone. The hall quieted instantly, everyone's focus turning to him. Julian took a deep, steadying breath and began with the opening line he had practiced. I've known Tobias since we were boys, sneaking pastries from my mother's kitchen. Light laughter rippled through the crowd. We've been through literally everything together. Youth football, high school, our first terrible jobs, all of it. He's been my best friend for over 20 years, and I can genuinely say I have never seen him as happy as he has been since he met Serafina. The crowd made approving sounds. Julian paused, took a sip of water, and continued. When you find your person, you simply know it. Some people search their whole lives and never find it. Some people think they know, and they get it profoundly wrong. But sometimes the universe has prearranged plans we cannot possibly comprehend. Things unfold the way they are meant to unfold, even when we can't see the outcome at the time. He paused again, and a few people subtly shifted uncomfortably. Nothing they could quite articulate. just an unsettling sense that the speech had veered onto an unexpected, difficult path. Julian seemed to notice, quickly adjusted his expression back to warmth, and recovered. But Tobias and Serafina proved that the right people ultimately find each other. When the love is real, nothing can stop it. When it's meant to be, it just works perfectly. He raised his glass higher. To love, to unbreakable friendship, to forever. The hall erupted in applause and raised glasses. Julian drained his entire drink in one gulp, set the empty glass on the podium, and returned to his seat. Tobias caught his eye from the head table, nodding with genuine appreciation. Serafina blew him a sweet kiss. Julian smiled back, that same painted, empty smile, and reached immediately for his next drink. Dinner service concluded around 8:15 p.m. The DJ announced it was time to officially open the dance floor. Tobias immediately pulled Serafina up, and they danced joyously to an upbeat, modern French pop song. Within minutes, the dance floor was completely packed. The energy shifted entirely from formal to loose and ecstatic. The DJ played crowd pleasers, songs everyone knew, and the hall transformed into the kind of vibrant party that guarantees fond memories. Julian remained seated. He watched the dancing from his table, which was now mostly empty as the groomsmen and their dates joined the fray. He nursed another scotch, scrolling aimlessly on his phone, not truly absorbing what he was looking at. But anyone observing closely would have noticed the photos he paused on, pictures of Serafina from 2 years ago at that gala, screenshots he had meticulously saved from her social media. Images he had stared at countless times. The DJ transitioned into classic line dance territory. The Madison brought everyone to the floor, followed by popular Zouglou tunes. Even Serafina's Tante Cecile got up, moving slowly but happily while her grandniece danced beside her. The hall was alive with movement and laughter, everyone swept up in the collective joy. Everyone except Julian, who remained at his table, finishing yet another drink, checking his phone, existing on the extreme edge of the celebration, but never truly a part of it. Around 9 p.m., Tobias broke away from the dance floor and made his way to Julian's table. His tie was loosened, his jacket discarded somewhere, his face flushed from dancing and overwhelming happiness. He dropped into the chair next to Julian, breathing hard. "Man, come on. Get out there. You've been sitting here all night." Julian looked up from his phone, managing a tired, forced smile. "Just needed a minute. I'll be out there soon, I promise." Tobias studied him for a second. "You all right?" The speech was incredible, by the way. It genuinely meant a lot. Julian nodded. "Yeah, I'm good. Just taking it all in, you know. It's a huge day." Tobias clapped him affectionately on the shoulder, then pulled him into a brief hug. Julian returned it, and in that moment, Tobias didn't register the scent of alcohol on his breath. He didn't notice that Julian's eyes weren't quite focused. He didn't see the phone screen still glowing with a 2-year-old photograph of Serafina. Tobias just saw his best friend, looking understandably exhausted at the conclusion of a very long day. "All right, well, seriously, come dance soon. Serafina keeps asking where you've disappeared to." He stood, squeezed Julian's shoulder one last time, and headed back toward the dance floor. Julian watched him go, watched Serafina's face light up instantly when Tobias reappeared, watched them dance together while their friends circled around them. He set his phone face down, finished the final drops of his scotch, and stood up. His legs were surprisingly steady, given the amount he had consumed. He straightened his tie, rolled his shoulders back, and prepared to rejoin the celebration. Julian took one more deep breath, put on his mask one more time, and walked toward the dance floor, where everyone he knew was celebrating a marriage he had spent 2 years wishing would simply vanish. 9:30 p.m. brought the elegant cake-cutting ceremony. Serafina and Tobias stood behind the 3-tier vanilla cake, their hands clasped together over the knife, smiling radiantly for cameras as flashes erupted from every angle. They cut the first slice together. Then came the playful part. Serafina fed Tobias a bite, intentionally smearing a dollop of frosting across his nose. He laughed, playfully retaliated by getting some on her cheek, and the hall erupted in warm applause. They kissed with frosting still on their faces while servers began distributing the slices to guests. The reception continued with that same electrifying, joyful energy. At 10:15 p.m., the DJ called all single ladies to the dance floor for the bouquet toss. Serafina counted down from 3 before launching her bouquet high over her shoulder. It sailed through the air and landed with shocking precision directly into Isabel's hands. She caught it instinctively, holding it aloft while everyone cheered. Serafina spun around, saw who had caught it, and shrieked with delight. The two best friends hugged, jumping up and down like giddy teenagers. By 10:45 p.m., genuine exhaustion was beginning to show beneath the veneer of happiness. Serafina had kicked off her heels an hour ago and was dancing barefoot. Tobias's tie hung loose, his jacket abandoned somewhere. They made their way to the DJ booth, and the music slowly faded. Ladies and gentlemen, the bride and groom will be departing for the evening. If you'd like to give them a proper send-off, please grab a sparkler and line up outside. Guests hurried to collect sparklers from large baskets by the exits. Within 5 minutes, a shimmering tunnel of people lined the path from the hall to the parking lot, sparklers lit and glowing brilliantly in the cool darkness. Serafina put her heels back on for this final, cinematic moment. She held Tobias's hand tightly as they walked through the tunnel of light, guests cheering and calling out heartfelt well wishes. Serafina paused to embrace her Tante Cecile. Tobias's mother pulled them both into a fierce, final hug. Then they continued to where Tobias's car waited, decorated with a just-married sign and tin cans tied to the bumper. Tobias opened the passenger door. Serafina carefully gathered her dress and climbed in. She instantly kicked off her heels again, tossing them into the back seat with a sigh of relief. Tobias got in, waved one last time to the cheering crowd, and they drove away. The Grand Palace Hotel was only 3 short blocks away. The drive took them down mostly empty, quiet streets. Tobias drove with one hand on the wheel and the other holding Serafina's hand. She had her head tilted back, her eyes closed, a faint smile playing on her lips. "We did it. We're married." They pulled up to the Grand Palace at 11:02 p.m. The valet took the keys and offered his congratulations. They walked through the ornate revolving door into a lobby of marble and subtle, warm lighting. The front desk clerk smiled widely. "Mr. and Mrs. Grant, congratulations. We've upgraded you to our premier corner honeymoon suite, room 412 on the 4th floor. Champagne and strawberries are waiting. Compliments of the hotel." She handed over 2 key cards. They headed for the elevators. The ride up was silent, save for soft lounge jazz playing over the speakers. Tobias pulled Serafina close, kissing the top of her head. The elevator chimed softly at the 4th floor. 412 was at the very end of the long hall. Tobias fumbled with the keycard, got it on the second try, and pushed the door open. Then, without warning, he scooped Serafina up and carried her across the threshold while she laughed joyously. The room was stunning. A king-sized bed covered in scattered rose petals. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the city lights. Champagne was chilling precisely on the nightstand next to a plate of chocolate-covered strawberries. 11:08 p.m. Serafina kicked off her heels. Tobias completely loosened his tie, pulling it over his head. They moved toward each other for a kiss that felt utterly different from all the public kisses that day. This one was intimate, unhurried, exclusively for them. When they finally broke apart, Tobias's phone buzzed quietly. He pulled it out, showing Serafina. A text message from Julian. "Groomsman hitting hotel bar. Last drink." Tobias looked genuinely torn. Serafina made the decision easy, gently straightening his collar. "Go celebrate with your friends. I need to freshen up anyway. Get out of this dress before I accidentally destroy it." Tobias hesitated. "Are you certain?" Serafina kissed him quickly. 15 minutes. That is absolutely it. Then you come back, and we begin our honeymoon properly. He kissed her once more, grabbed his keycard, and headed for the door. 15 minutes. "I promise." The door clicked shut at 11:12 p.m. Tobias took the elevator back down, walked straight to the hotel bar. The groomsmen were clustered at one end, the bar mostly empty otherwise. They cheered when they saw him, immediately ordering him a scotch. Julian was there too, sitting slightly apart, tie gone and shirt untucked, his eyes looking noticeably red-rimmed. When Tobias approached, Julian stood and hugged him. "Man of the hour. How's married life so far?" Tobias laughed heartily. "It's been 45 minutes. Ask me again in a year." The group launched into a detailed wedding recap, reliving their favorite moments. Julian insisted everyone do a shot, waving off their protests. Tequila appeared, and they toasted before throwing them back. Tobias checked his watch. 11:18 p.m. At 11:20 p.m., Julian stood abruptly, swaying almost imperceptibly. "Bathroom break. Be right back." He headed toward the hallway where the restrooms were located, but instead of turning right, he continued straight toward the elevators. No one at the bar noticed his departure. The elevator doors opened instantly. He stepped inside and pressed 4. The doors silently slid closed, carrying Julian toward the 4th floor, where Serafina was completely alone in room 412. The elevator climbed smoothly. Julian stood rigidly still, his hands held at his sides, staring intently at the brass doors. The floor indicator chimed at 4. The doors opened onto the quiet, deeply carpeted hallway. 412 was to the right, the corner suite at the end. Julian walked toward it, his dress shoes making no sound on the thick carpet. When he reached the door, he slowly raised his hand and knocked 3 times. Inside, Serafina had just managed to unfasten the zipper of her wedding dress, attempting to figure out how to completely step out of the heavy gown. She heard the knock and smiled, assuming Tobias had forgotten his keycard. She crossed the room, still in the half-unzipped dress, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled the door open. But it wasn't Tobias. It was Julian. Disheveled, red-rimmed eyes focused entirely on her, looking at her with a consuming, terrifying intensity that made her smile instantly vanish. For one paralyzed split second, neither of them moved. Then Serafina began to ask what was wrong, if Tobias was all right, why Julian was standing there, but Julian was already stepping forward, and the door was already closing behind him. Julian's appearance stopped her mid-sentence. His tie was gone, his shirt untucked and heavily wrinkled, his hair disheveled as if he'd been violently running his hands through it. His eyes were bloodshot and unfocused, his breathing heavier than it should have been from simply walking down a short hallway. For a terrifying split second, neither of them moved. Then Serafina's brain finally caught up, desperately trying to process why Julian was here instead of downstairs with Tobias. Is Tobias okay? What is wrong? Julian didn't offer a word of reply. He stepped forward, crossing the threshold without waiting for permission, and Serafina instinctively recoiled to give him space. The door swung closed behind him with a soft click that suddenly felt deafening. Serafina's deep confusion intensified into a profound discomfort she couldn't yet fully name. "Julian, what is happening? Where is Tobias? We need to talk." Julian's voice was flat, tightly controlled in a way that utterly contradicted his disheveled appearance. He reached behind him and turned the deadbolt. The lock slid into place with a definitive thunk. Serafina's heart rate instantly spiked. Something was catastrophically wrong. She took another step backward, her hands rising slightly in an unconscious defensive posture. "Julian, you are frightening me. What do you need to talk about?" He turned to face her fully, and the look in his eyes made her stomach plummet to her feet. She had never seen him look at her like this, not in 2 years of dinners and holidays and wedding planning. This was not the supportive friend who had helped design their entire wedding. This was a stranger wearing Julian's face. "It should have been me." His voice was a quiet, almost conversational whisper, which somehow made it infinitely worse. "From the very beginning, it should have been me." Serafina shook her head, unable to comprehend. "What are you saying, Julian? You need to leave. Whatever this is, we can discuss it tomorrow when you're sober." She desperately tried to keep her voice calm, authoritative, the same tone she used with agitated teenagers at the youth center, but her hands were visibly shaking now. I invited Tobias to that gala. Julian took a step closer. Serafina took a step back, her shoulder blades hitting the wall. She had nowhere else to go. I saw you first. I spent weeks planning how to approach you. I was supposed to introduce myself that night. You were supposed to notice me. He took another step closer. His large body was now between her and the door, completely blocking her only escape. But Tobias showed up late, and you looked at him instead. You didn't even give me a chance. The horrific understanding crashed over Serafina like a wave of ice water. 2 years of treating Julian like family. And he had been harboring this monstrous delusion the entire time. She pressed harder against the wall, desperately trying to make herself smaller. Julian, I didn't know. I am so sorry, but I am married now. I love Tobias. You need to leave right now. I've waited 2 years. Julian's voice was finally rising, the careful control rapidly fracturing. 2 years of watching him have everything I wanted. Watching you touch him, laugh with him, build a life with him. Do you have any idea what that feels like? I am not a possession to be taken. Serafina's voice came out sharper than she intended, a potent mix of fear and anger. I made a choice. I chose Tobias. And you need to respect that and leave. She tried to pivot toward the phone on the nightstand, but Julian was impossibly fast. His hand shot out and clamped down on her wrist, his fingers digging in hard enough to instantly bruise. Serafina gasped, tried desperately to pull away, but his grip was iron. Don't. The single word was a chilling, absolute warning. Serafina's professional training instantly kicked in. All those workshops on de-escalation. Stay calm. Keep talking. Look for an exit. But her heart was pounding so violently she could barely formulate a coherent thought. She was exhausted from the longest day of her life. Julian was fueled by 2 years of festering resentment and whatever he had been drinking downstairs. Julian, please. She tried one last time, her voice cracking with terror. Please don't do this. We can both forget this happened. Just let me go and leave. But he wasn't listening to her anymore. Something in his expression had transformed from pleading to determined, from hurt to a chilling entitlement. You should have chosen me. And then he was violently pulling her away from the wall, and Serafina was screaming, a guttural, piercing sound loud enough that someone should have heard. But the hotel walls were thick, designed for guest privacy, and faint music from the wedding reception still drifted up from 3 blocks away. No one heard. No one came. Serafina fought back with every ounce of strength she possessed. She clawed at his face, her fingernails raking across his left cheek and down his neck, leaving angry, livid red marks that would be undeniable evidence by morning. She tried to knee him, tried to break his grip, tried every single self-defense move she'd ever been taught. But Julian had the advantage of size and leverage, and 2 years of pent-up, volcanic rage driving him forward. Her exhaustion from dancing in heels for hours, from the crushing emotional weight of the entire day, made her movements slow and ineffective. The brutal struggle lasted minutes that felt like an eternity. Serafina kept screaming until Julian's hand brutally covered her mouth. Kept fighting until her arms felt like lead weights. Kept resisting until her body simply gave out. The assault was fueled by pure rejection, by an insane sense of entitlement, by a man who had successfully convinced himself that sheer patience and proximity equaled a right to ownership. Serafina's mind desperately tried to detach from the violence, tried to protect itself from a trauma it could not possibly prevent. Her final, fading conscious thought before the darkness finally pulled her under was Tobias's name, called out silently, like a desperate, unanswered prayer. 11:34 p.m. Julian stood up, breathing heavily, looking down at Serafina's unconscious form lying on the expensive carpet beside the bed. The rose petals that had been scattered so romantically were now disturbed and crushed. Her exquisite wedding dress was torn at the shoulder and hem, her hair violently tangled. Blood stained the carpet from the injuries she had sustained while desperately fighting him off. Julian stared for a long, unsettling moment. Then, something seemed to instantly click back into a familiar, cold place. He meticulously straightened his clothes, carefully tucked his shirt back in with trembling hands. He walked to the bathroom, soaked a small hand towel, and wiped his face where she had fiercely scratched him. The marks were still clearly visible, angry and red. He checked his reflection in the mirror, smoothed his hair, and took several deep breaths until his heart rate returned to a functional pace. Then, he walked to the door, unlocked the deadbolt, and stepped silently into the hallway. The corridor was empty and utterly quiet. He gently pulled the door closed behind him, hearing it softly latch. No alarms, no witnesses, just thick carpet, soft lighting, and the distant electronic hum of the elevator. Julian walked to the elevator, pressed the button. When the doors opened, the car was empty. He stepped inside, pressed the lobby button. 4th floor, 3rd floor, 2nd floor, lobby. He made his way back to the hotel bar where the groomsmen were still gathered, their voices boisterous. He checked his watch. 11:37 p.m. 17 minutes since he had left. Tobias looked up when Julian slid back onto his bar stool. "Man, where did you go? You missed 2 rounds." His voice was loose with alcohol, happy and completely unsuspecting. Julian picked up his abandoned drink, taking a long, steady swallow before replying. "Had to call my mum. She wanted a rundown on the wedding. You know how she gets." Tobias laughed, nodded, already turning back to the animated conversation. He didn't notice the fresh, angry scratches on Julian's face, partially obscured by the dim bar lighting. He didn't notice that Julian's shirt was more wrinkled than before, or that his hands were still trembling slightly. Julian sat there drinking with the groomsmen, laughing at jokes he barely heard, responding to questions on pure autopilot. Upstairs in room 412, Serafina lay unconscious on the floor, her body violently broken and her wedding night utterly destroyed. And downstairs in the hotel bar, her husband sat 3 feet away from the man who had just stolen everything, completely unaware that in approximately 6 minutes, his entire life was about to shatter into pieces he would spend the rest of his existence trying to reassemble. 11:43 p.m. Tobias drained the last of his scotch, set the glass down hard on the bar, and stood up. "All right, gentlemen. My wife is patiently waiting for me." The groomsmen hooted and made predictable jokes he barely registered. He clapped a few shoulders and headed straight for the elevators. Julian watched him go, his face meticulously neutral, his hands steady around his glass. Tobias pressed the elevator button, stepped inside alone. The ride up felt interminably long. He hummed the melody from their first dance, checked his reflection in the brass doors, and straightened his collar. He looked like a man on his wedding night, blissful, slightly drunk, and completely in love. He had absolutely no idea what unspeakable horror awaited him. The elevator chimed at the 4th floor. Tobias stepped out into the quiet hallway, walking quickly toward the corner where room 412 was located, already reaching for his keycard. Then he stopped dead. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hallway. His first thought was simple confusion. Serafina would never leave the door open. She was far too meticulous for that. His second thought was overwhelming concern. Tobias slowly pushed the door open. "Serafina, are you okay?" No response. He stepped inside, and the scene hit him with the force of a physical blow. The lights were on, bright and brutally revealing. Rose petals were scattered everywhere, some crushed. The champagne bucket was overturned on the nightstand, water pooling. And Serafina was on the floor beside the bed, her wedding dress violently torn, her body motionless, one arm twisted at an angle that looked sickeningly wrong. The sound that tore from Tobias wasn't a word. It was a raw, primal scream, pure, desperate animal sound. The couple in the room next door heard it clearly through the thick walls and sat up in bed with wide, frightened eyes. Tobias was already moving, dropping frantically to his knees beside Serafina, his hands hovering over her body, terrified to touch her, terrified not to. "Baby, wake up. Serafina." Her eyes were closed, her face bruised, blood clearly visible on the carpet beneath her head. He pressed 2 trembling fingers to her neck, searching frantically for a pulse. Found nothing. Tried again, shifting position, pressing harder. Nothing. Her chest was still. Her lips were already turning blue. Tobias's brain couldn't process what his hands were telling him. He grabbed his phone with shaking hands and frantically dialed the local emergency number. Emergency services, what is your emergency? My wife, she's not breathing. There's blood. Please. You have to help. Tobias's voice cracked, climbing toward sheer hysteria. The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional. Sir, what is your location? The Grand Palace Hotel, room 412. Please hurry. The dispatcher asked if she was breathing. Tobias looked at Serafina's chest, watching for movement that simply wasn't there. No, she's not breathing. Please. The dispatcher gave concise instructions. Start CPR. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Tobias positioned his hands on her chest the way he'd seen in movies, having no idea if he was doing it correctly. He pushed down, counting, his voice breaking on every number. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her body moved with each compression, but she remained unresponsive. He tilted her head back, tried desperately to breathe air into her lungs. Nothing. He returned to compressions, tears streaming down his face. Come on, baby. Come on. Please. The dispatcher remained on the line, keeping him going, telling him that help was imminent. 11:47 p.m. Hotel security burst through the open door, saw Tobias performing CPR, and immediately radioed for his manager. Room 412, medical emergency. CPR in progress. Where is that ambulance? Tobias looked up, his eyes desperate. She's not breathing. Help her. The security guard immediately dropped to his knees on the other side, taking over compressions while Tobias tried rescue breaths again. They worked in tandem, frantic, until the paramedics finally arrived at 11:49 p.m. The paramedics moved with practiced, cold efficiency, taking over immediately. They checked for a pulse, for respiration, and started Grant life support. Tobias was gently pushed back as they worked, watching them insert a breathing tube, start and 4-line, begin chest compressions with mechanical precision. One of the paramedics called out vital signs that meant nothing to Tobias but everything to the medical team. No pulse. No respirations. Pupils fixed and dilated. They worked for 8 agonizing minutes that felt like an eternity. Compressions, medications, the defibrillator charged and discharged. Nothing. Finally, the lead paramedic stopped, looked at his watch, and spoke words that would echo in Tobias's mind for the rest of his life. Time of death, 11:57 p.m. Tobias's legs gave out completely. He would have hit the floor if Officer DuPont hadn't caught him. No. No, that's wrong. Keep trying. Please keep trying. But the paramedics were already stepping back, their specialized equipment going silent. One of them turned to Tobias, her face professionally sympathetic but absolutely certain. I am so sorry, sir. We did everything we could. She's gone. Gone. The word made no sense. Serafina couldn't be gone. They had just been married 7 hours ago. She had been alive and laughing and dancing. This was supposed to be their honeymoon. Officer DuPont gently guided Tobias to a chair while his partner quickly secured the scene. This was no longer just a medical emergency. This was a homicide. 2 detectives were already en route. The medical examiner would need to be called immediately. Evidence had to be meticulously preserved. But for now, in this single suspended moment, Tobias sat in a hotel room beside his wife's body, still wearing his wrinkled wedding tuxedo, desperately trying to understand how the greatest day of his life had become the worst. Detective Claire Vidal arrived at 12:15 a.m., June 16th. She had been called out of bed for a homicide at the Grand Palace, victim a newly wedded bride viciously attacked in her honeymoon suite. Vidal had worked sex crimes for 14 years and had seen unspeakable things. But something about this case felt different, hitting a raw nerve. She walked into room 412, absorbed the horrific scene, and felt the immense weight of it settle on her shoulders. A woman who should have been starting her married life was instead lying dead on the floor, her wedding dress torn, her face bruised, her entire future stolen. Vidal made a silent, concrete promise standing in that doorway. Whoever did this would not escape justice. Not on her watch. 12:15 a.m. Detective Claire Vidal pulled up to the Grand Palace Hotel in an unmarked sedan, her partner, Detective Marc Lefebvre, following closely in a separate vehicle. Vidal was a 14-year veteran of the sex crimes unit, called in the moment hotel security mentioned the nature of the injuries. Lefebvre was homicide, brought in because the dispatcher's notes indicated a critical condition, possible fatality. Together, they represented the comprehensive scope of what this case was rapidly becoming. Vidal flashed her badge at the uniformed officers securing the lobby. The elevator ride to the 4th floor was silent. Both detectives were mentally steeling themselves for the trauma they were about to witness. Room 412 was already secured, yellow crime scene tape stretched across the door, a uniformed officer standing guard with a detailed log. Vidal signed in, noted the time, and stepped inside. The room immediately told a devastating story before anyone spoke a single word. Rose petals scattered and crushed on the floor. An overturned champagne bucket. Water pooling on the nightstand. A broken champagne flute. Glass shards glinting dangerously near the bed. Blood on the carpet, not a deluge, but enough to be deeply significant. And the wedding dress. White lace violently torn at the shoulder and hem, lying where it had been abandoned. This was supposed to be a honeymoon suite. Instead, it was a sealed crime scene. The crime scene unit arrived at 12:20 a.m. 4 technicians equipped with cameras, evidence kits, and the methodical patience required to document everything flawlessly. They began with photographs, every angle captured in high resolution, wide shots establishing the entire scene, and close-ups of every minute piece of evidence. They carefully placed evidence markers, small yellow placards with numbers, at 13 points of interest throughout the room. Each marker represented a crucial piece of the story they were desperately trying to reconstruct. Detective Vidal walked the room slowly, taking meticulous mental notes while the technicians worked. No forced entry. The door lock was undamaged, the deadbolt fully functional. That meant the victim either knew her attacker or the attacker had unauthorized access to a keycard. Vidal radioed down to the front desk immediately. How many keycards were issued for room 412? The answer came back instantly. 2 cards, both given to Mr. and Mrs. Grant at check-in. Both cards were accounted for, one with the victim's belongings, one with the distraught husband downstairs. Thus, the door was opened willingly, or the attacker had successfully convinced the victim to let them in. The technicians dusted for fingerprints, carefully lifting prints from the door handle, the champagne bottle, the bathroom sink, every surface that might possibly tell them who had been in this room. They swabbed for DNA, collecting biological evidence from the bed, the carpet, anywhere that might contain genetic material from the attacker. Vidal examined the torn dress more closely. Fabric ripped at the shoulder where it had been violently pulled, the hem torn where it had caught during a desperate struggle. The undeniable signs were there if you knew how to read them. This had not been consensual. This was force, violence, and sexual assault. The blood on the carpet was traced to head trauma. The champagne bucket was overturned during the struggle. Every single piece of evidence pointed to the same devastating conclusion. Downstairs, in a quiet hotel conference room, Detective Lefebvre was interviewing the husband. Tobias Grant sat at the table, still wearing his crumpled tuxedo. His face was streaked with mascara from crying. His hands wouldn't stop violently shaking. Lefebvre had witnessed this before, the profound shock and trauma of discovering a loved one hurt. Sometimes it was completely genuine. Sometimes it was a careful performance. His job was to ascertain which. Mr. Grant, I know this is unimaginably difficult, but I need you to walk me through your evening. Please start with when you arrived at the hotel. Tobias's voice was hollow, automated. We got here around 11 o'clock, checked in, went up to the room. We were there for maybe 6 minutes, and then I got a text from my best man. The groomsmen wanted one last drink at the hotel bar. Lefebvre took notes. What time did you leave the room? 11:12 p.m. I specifically checked the time because Serafina said I could only be gone for 15 minutes. Lefebvre noted the specificity. Did you and your wife argue tonight at all? Tobias looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and confused. What? No, never. We were happy. We were married today. This was supposed to be the best day of our lives. Lefebvre kept his expression neutral. Does your wife have any enemies? Anyone who might want to hurt her? Tobias shook his head. No. Everyone loved her. She's a child psychologist. She helps people. She doesn't have enemies. Lefebvre made another note. Who knew you were staying in this hotel tonight? Tobias thought for a long moment. Everyone, I guess. It wasn't a secret. We mentioned it during the reception. Lefebvre excused himself, stepped into the hallway, and radioed Vidal. Husband's alibi is the hotel bar from 11:12 to 11:43. Says he was with the groomsmen the entire time. Vidal responded immediately. Get the security footage and verify that with the bartender. Lefebvre headed to the security office, pulled the footage from the bar camera, and watched Tobias sit at the bar, drinking with 4 other men. The timestamp confirmed it. 11:12 p.m. Tobias appears. 11:43 p.m. Tobias leaves. He was visibly present the entire time. No gaps, no opportunity to go upstairs. The bartender confirmed it independently. Tobias Grant had an airtight alibi. Vidal received the update and instantly eliminated Tobias as a suspect. He didn't do this, which meant someone else had access to that room. Someone else the victim trusted enough to open the door for. Vidal pulled out her phone and called the local hospital. This is Detective Vidal, Lyon PD. I need an update on the assault victim brought in from the Grand Palace. The nurse on duty checked the system. She's in surgery now. Critical condition, trauma consistent with sexual assault and blunt force head injury. Doctor noted defensive wounds on her hands and what appears to be skin cells under her fingernails. Vidal felt something click violently into place. Preserve that evidence. I need those nail scrapings processed immediately. Back at the crime scene, the technicians were finishing up, sealing evidence bags, documenting the chain of custody. 13 total pieces of evidence collected. Fingerprints, DNA swabs, the torn dress, the broken glass, and hundreds of photographs of everything. Vidal stood in the doorway of room 412, looking at the space one more time. Somewhere in this room was the essential answer. Somewhere in this evidence was the individual who had destroyed 2 lives tonight. She pulled out her notebook and started writing a detailed list. Interview all wedding guests staying at the hotel. Pull security footage from all cameras. Find out who had access to the 4th floor between 11:12 p.m. and 11:43 p.m. Someone saw something. Someone knew something. And Detective Claire Vidal wasn't leaving until she found out who. 1:15 a.m. Detective Vidal found Isabel in the hotel lobby, still in sweatpants and a t-shirt, pacing frantically while on the phone. Vidal approached cautiously, badge visible. Ma'am, I'm Detective Vidal. I need to ask you some questions about Serafina. Isabel ended the call immediately, her eyes desperate. Is she okay? Please tell me she's okay. Vidal gently guided her to a quiet corner. She's in surgery. That's all I know right now, but I need your help to figure out what happened. They sat in the empty hotel restaurant. Isabel identified herself as the maid of honor, Serafina's best friend since high school. Vidal pulled out her notebook. Did Serafina mention anyone making her uncomfortable tonight? Anyone who seemed off or acted inappropriately? Isabel shook her head emphatically. No. She was so happy tonight. The happiest I have ever seen her. Everyone was celebrating. There was nothing wrong. Vidal made a note. What about recently? Anyone showing any unusual, intense interest? Isabel thought hard, then slowly shook her head. No, nothing specific. By 2 a.m., Vidal had the full guest list. All 150 wedding attendees documented, cross-referenced with the hotel registry. 32 guests had rooms at the Grand Palace. Vidal assigned uniformed officers to start knocking on doors. Did you see anyone in the fourth-floor hallway between 11 o'clock and midnight? Did you hear anything unusual? Detective Lefebvre focused on the groomsmen. All four were gathered in a conference room, sobering up quickly. Lefebvre questioned each one individually. Where were you between 11 p.m. and midnight? All four gave the identical answer. At the hotel bar with Tobias. Multiple witnesses confirmed it. Security footage confirmed it. But when Lefebvre asked if anyone left during that time, one of the groomsmen hesitated. Yeah. Julien went to the bathroom. Maybe around 11:20. Lefebvre's attention sharpened. How long was he gone? The groomsman shrugged. I don't know, man. We were drinking. Didn't really pay attention. Another groomsman was more specific. Julien said bathroom break. But he was gone for a while, like longer than you'd expect. Lefebvre found the bartender, a woman named Amélie. Do you remember the group at the end of the bar tonight? Wedding party. Amélie nodded. Yes, they were celebrating. Ordered a lot of scotch. Lefebvre showed her a photo, pointing to Julien. Do you remember this man leaving? Amélie studied the photo, then nodded slowly. Yes, he left maybe around 11:20. I remember because he looked kind of out of it. Red eyes, messy. Lefebvre leaned forward. How long was he gone? Amélie thought about it carefully. Maybe 15-20 minutes. I noticed because it seemed long for a simple bathroom break. Lefebvre radioed Vidal. I've got a timeline discrepancy. Julien Moreau left the bar at 11:20 p.m. Didn't return until approximately 11:37 p.m. A 17-minute absence. Vidal immediately requested security footage from the hotel's full system. The security manager pulled up the digital files. 11:20 p.m. Julien Moreau appears on camera, walking away from the bar. He does not go toward the restrooms. He walks toward the elevators. 11:21 p.m. Elevator doors open. He steps inside. The internal camera clearly shows him pressing the button for the fourth floor. 11:22 p.m. He exits on the fourth floor, walks down the hallway, then disappears from view. The hallway near room 412 wasn't covered by cameras. Vidal kept watching. 11:35 p.m. Julien reappears, walking back toward the elevator. His shirt looks noticeably more wrinkled. He's adjusting it, frantically tucking it in. His face is flushed. 11:37 p.m. He exits in the lobby, walks back toward the bar. Vidal rewound the footage, watched it again. 15 minutes unaccounted for on the fourth floor, the exact same floor where Serafina was brutally attacked. The timeline matched perfectly. Vidal subpoenaed phone records for all the groomsmen. By 2:20 a.m., preliminary data came through. Tobias's phone showed a text at 11:08 p.m. from Julien Moreau, groomsman hitting hotel bar last drink. Julien's phone records showed no outgoing calls between 11 p.m. and midnight. No call to his mother. He had lied. 2:30 a.m. Uniformed officers brought Julien Moreau to the station for voluntary questioning. He came willingly, still in his wedding attire minus the tie, looking exhausted but cooperative. Vidal and Lefebvre led him to an interview room. Julien sat down, looking between both detectives. Is Serafina okay? Tobias called me from the hospital. Vidal started with the basics. Name, address, relationship to the victim. Julien answered calmly. Best man known Tobias since childhood. Considered Serafina a friend. Then Vidal shifted abruptly. Julien, Where were you between 11:20 p.m. and 11:37 p.m. tonight? Julian didn't hesitate. Bathroom. Then I stepped outside to call my mum. She wanted to know how the wedding went. Vidal made a pointed note. Your phone records show no outgoing calls during that time. Julian blinked. Oh, maybe I didn't get through. Or maybe I texted her. I don't remember exactly. I'd been drinking. Lefebvre leaned forward slightly. Julian, we need absolute honesty here. Did you go to room 412 tonight? Julian's expression didn't change. No. Why would I? Vidal slid a photograph across the table. Security footage timestamp. Julian Moreau entering the elevator. This shows you going to the 4th floor at 11:20 p.m. Room 412 is on the 4th floor. Julian looked at the photo, then back at Vidal. I was looking for the bathroom. I got confused. The hotel's layout is bizarre when you're drunk. Vidal pulled out another photo. Julian exiting the elevator at 11:35 p.m., shirt disheveled. You were on the 4th floor for 15 minutes. That's an exceedingly long time to be looking for a bathroom. Julian's jaw tightened slightly. I don't know what you want me to say. I was drunk. I wandered around, eventually found my way back. I did not go to their room. Vidal leaned back, studying him intently. Serafina was attacked in that room during the exact time window you were on that floor. Julian's face showed calculated shock. Attacked? What are you talking about? Lefebvre explained the basics. Sexual assault. Critical injuries. Julian looked genuinely stunned. That's absolutely horrible. But I didn't do anything. I didn't even know which room they were in. Vidal made a quick note. That was a lie. The groomsman had helped with luggage earlier. Julian knew exactly which room. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, Julian sticking rigidly to his story. Finally, Vidal ended it. We'll be in touch. Do not leave the city. Julian walked out at 3:15 a.m. Vidal and Lefebvre watched him through the one-way glass. Lefebvre spoke first. He did it. Vidal nodded slowly. Yes, but we need concrete evidence. Get forensics to rush that DNA from under her fingernails. We have timeline and opportunity now. We need physical evidence to put him inside that room. 6 a.m., June 16th. Detective Vidal's phone buzzed with the preliminary forensic results. She had been at her desk for 3 hours, running on black coffee, waiting for this critical call. The crime scene technician got straight to the point. We lifted multiple clear fingerprints from the door handle of room 412. One set belongs to the victim. One set belongs to the husband. And one set belongs to Julian Moreau. Vidal sat up straighter in her chair. You are absolutely certain? The tech confirmed. Positive match. His prints are in the system from a background check 2 years ago. Vidal immediately called Julian. He answered on the third ring, his voice groggy. Hello. Vidal identified herself. Mr. Moreau, your fingerprints were found on the door handle of room 412. Can you explain that? There was a long pause. Then Julian's voice came back, noticeably more alert. Oh, yes. I helped them with their luggage earlier when they first got to the hotel. Carried some stuff up for them. Vidal made a note. What time was that? Julian thought for a moment. Maybe around 11 p.m. Vidal ended the call and pulled the hotel check-in logs and security footage. Tobias and Serafina arrived at 11:02 p.m. They went directly to their room with no assistance. No groomsmen were present. Julian Moreau had not been to that room before 11:20 p.m. His explanation was a deliberate lie, and now they had his fingerprints definitively placing him at the scene. The second crucial piece of evidence came from the interview footage. Vidal pulled up the recording, paused directly on Julian's face. There, clearly visible on his left cheek and running down his neck, were scratch marks. Fresh, angry, bright red, the kind left by fingernails during a violent struggle. 8 a.m. Vidal and Lefebvre obtained a search warrant for Julien's apartment. They arrived with a forensic team, knocked, and Julien answered, clearly startled. Vidal handed him the warrant. "We need to search your apartment." Julien stepped aside, his expression instantly shifting to carefully controlled neutrality. The apartment was sparse. Minimal furniture, everything obsessively organized. No photos on the walls, no personal touches. Vidal turned to Julien. "You mentioned you got those scratches from your cat. Where is it?" Julien's jaw tightened. "It might have gotten out. I haven't seen it since yesterday." Lefebvre searched the bathroom. No litter box. No cat food. No evidence a cat had ever lived there. Julien had lied again. The forensic team seized his laptop, a phone backup drive, and a leather journal from his nightstand. Back at the station, Vidal opened the journal. The entries were methodical, dated, and incredibly detailed. April 14, 2018. Met her tonight. Tobias got in the way. The night Tobias and Serafina met. December 18, 2019. He proposed. Should have been my ring on her finger. This isn't over. June 1, 2020. 2 weeks until the wedding. Last chance to show her the truth. Digital forensics analyzed Julien's laptop. Screenshots of Serafina's social media posts dating back 2 years. Photos saved from her Instagram. Hundreds of images organized in folders by date. An obsessive pattern of monitoring her entire life. This was not friendship. This was surveillance. 10 a.m. Vidal drove to Tobias's parents' house, where he had spent the night. He looked utterly sleep-deprived, still wearing his tuxedo pants and dress shirt, now wrinkled and stained. His parents sat beside him. Serafina's tante Cecile was there too, her eyes red from weeping. Vidal approached carefully. "Mr. Grant, I need to speak with you." They walked out to the front porch. Vidal sat across from him. "We have a suspect. The evidence is pointing to Julien Moreau." Tobias's reaction was immediate. "What? No, that's impossible. He would never." His voice broke completely. Vidal waited patiently. Tobias's face cycled through stages: denial, confusion, then a terrible, crushing understanding. Vidal laid out the evidence. The timeline, the fingerprints, the lies, the journal entries documenting years of silent obsession. Tobias listened, his face growing paler with every detail. When Vidal finished, he put his head in his hands and softly wept. "He was my brother. I trusted him with everything. And then he killed her." 2 p.m. The DNA results came through. Match confirmed. Julien Moreau's DNA from the sexual assault evidence, skin cells found under Serafina's fingernails, matched Julien's DNA profile. The medical examiner's report confirmed the definitive cause of death: blunt force trauma to the head combined with asphyxiation during the assault. Every piece of physical evidence pointed to the same, singular conclusion. Julien Moreau had murdered Serafina Grant in her honeymoon suite. Vidal called the district attorney, laying out every detail: timeline, motive, physical evidence, digital evidence, and the pattern of lies. The DA gave the immediate green light. "Bring him in." By 3 p.m., Judge Lemaire had signed the warrant. Charges: first-degree murder, first-degree sexual assault, burglary. Vidal assembled her team. "Julien Moreau is now a wanted suspect. Let's bring him in." 3:30 p.m. Vidal, Lefebvre, and 4 uniformed officers pulled up to Julien's apartment. They positioned themselves at all exits, knocked on the door. No answer. They knocked again, announcing themselves. "Julien Moreau, this is Lion Police. We have a warrant for your arrest. Open the door." Silence. Vidal nodded to the officer with the battering ram. One hit, and the door flew open. They swept the apartment, weapons drawn. Empty. Julian was gone. Vidal stood in the middle of the living room. The closet was half empty now. Clothes were missing. The bathroom counter was cleared of toiletries. In the kitchen, the trash can held an empty duffel bag package. Receipt time stamped at 1:15 p.m. Vidal checked her watch. They had missed him by less than 2 hours. Julian Moreau had packed and fled. She radioed dispatch. Issue a bolo for Julian Moreau. White male, age 26, 180 centimeters, approximately 77 kilos, wanted for first-degree murder. Considered armed and dangerous. By 4 p.m., Julian's face was on every news station in France. Breaking news: Lyon police searching for Julian Moreau in connection with the murder of newlywed Serafina Grant. His wedding photo, smiling in his best man tuxedo beside a devastated Tobias, appeared next to Serafina's radiant bridal portrait. The story went national within hours. Wedding night murder. Best man accused of killing bride. Tips immediately began flooding in. Someone thought they saw Julian at a gas station in Belgium. Another caller reported seeing him at a bus station in Switzerland. Every lead was meticulously investigated. Everyone turned out to be nothing. By midnight on June 16, 24 hours after Serafina's murder, Julian Moreau had vanished completely. No credit card activity, no phone pings, no sightings that checked out. He had disappeared, and Vidal knew the first 48 hours were absolutely critical. After that, trails went cold. Vidal sat at her desk at 1 a.m., staring at Julian's photo. He could run, but he couldn't hide forever. Eventually, he would slip up, make a mistake, get comfortable. And when he did, Vidal would be ready. The hunt had only just begun. June 17, 2020. 24 hours after Julian Moreau disappeared, the Lyon Police Department officially declared him a fugitive. His face appeared on the Interpol Red Notice list by noon. Wanted for first-degree murder, sexual assault, and fleeing to avoid prosecution. The story that had dominated local news exploded across Europe. CNN, BBC, Euronews, every major network picked it up. Wedding night murderer hunted in bride's death. Julian's smiling photo appeared everywhere. June 19, 2020. Serafina's funeral. St. John Cathedral in Lyon overflowed with mourners. People stood in the aisles and spilled out onto the front steps. The same cathedral where she had sung in the gospel choir every Sunday now held her casket, white with crimson roses, the same colors from her wedding 3 days earlier. Tobias sat in the front row between his parents, staring blankly, his face gaunt and aged beyond his 26 years. Serafina's Tante Cecile sat across the aisle, so utterly broken by grief she could barely remain standing. Isabel delivered the eulogy, her voice trembling but resolute. Serafina believed in second chances. She believed people were fundamentally good. She gave her whole heart to everyone she met. And someone exploited that trust in the most despicable way. The funeral director had set up chairs for the wedding party on one side of the casket. 4 chairs for the bridesmaids, 3 chairs for the groomsmen, and 1 empty chair. The spot where Julian Moreau should have been sitting as best man, mourning the woman he had murdered. That empty chair told the entire story. Betrayal, trust annihilated, a monster hiding behind the mask of friendship. After the service, they buried Serafina at a beautiful cemetery under an ancient olive tree. Tobias stood at the grave long after everyone else had departed, unable to say goodbye to a life that had barely been given a chance to start. Europol formally joined the investigation on June 20th. Special Agent Thierry Dubois took the lead, coordinating with Detective Vidal and forming a multinational task force. They tracked Julian's financial activity first. No credit card usage since June 15th. No ATM withdrawals, no bank account activity. He had either stockpiled cash before running or was working under the table somewhere remote. His phone went dead the afternoon of June 16th. Last ping near the French-Italian border. After that, absolute silence. His car was found abandoned in a train station parking lot in Milan, Italy, on June 18th. He had switched transportation, likely purchasing a ticket with cash, and vanished into the European network. Dubois and Vidal questioned Julian's mother at her home in Bordeaux. She sat on her sofa holding a photo of Julian as a child, tears streaming down her face. He couldn't have done this. There has been a terrible mistake. Vidal showed her the evidence, the DNA match, the security footage, the journal entries. His mother shook her head, refusing to believe. If he contacts you, you need to tell us immediately. His mother looked away. He won't. He knows I would turn him in. But Vidal was unconvinced. The tips started flooding in within hours of the story going national. The hotline received 300 calls the first day. Someone saw Julian at a roadside cafe in Spain. Another caller swore they saw him at a bus terminal in Germany. A convenience store clerk in a rest stop in the Netherlands thought he recognized him. Every single lead was investigated. Agents drove to Spain, reviewed security footage. Wrong person. Marshals went to Germany, tracked down the sighting. Case of mistaken identity. Netherlands rest stop. The clerk couldn't identify Julian from a photo lineup. False lead. Every day brought new sightings. Every day brought new crushing disappointments. Tobias's life existed in a frozen state of suspension. He couldn't possibly move forward because Julian hadn't been apprehended. He couldn't find closure because justice had not been served. He stayed at his parents' house, unable to return to the apartment he had shared with Serafina. At night, he replayed every interaction with Julian, searching for the terrifying signs he had missed. The journal entries haunted him the most. 2 years of silent, malevolent obsession happening right under his nose. Public pressure mounted as weeks bled into months. "Where is Julian Moreau?" became a relentless rallying cry on social media. The reward money increased from €25,000 to €50,000. July passed. August came and went. September arrived with a trail growing colder by the day. Some investigators privately worried Julian had fled to North Africa or South America. Others thought he might have successfully assumed a new identity, finding work somewhere incredibly remote. October brought renewed media attention when the case was featured on a major European true crime documentary series and multiple popular podcasts. November saw the first anniversary of their engagement pass with Serafina's chair at her Tante Cecile's table sitting empty. December approached, marking 6 long months since the murder, half a year of Julian Moreau walking free. The Europol task force met weekly, reviewing evidence, following dead-end leads, coming up empty every single time. Detective Vidal sat in her office on December 15, 2020, staring intently at Julian's photo pinned to her evidence board. 6 months, 183 days since he had murdered Serafina and disappeared. Her partner, Lefebvre, had moved on to other cases. The media had mostly stopped calling. The public's fickle attention had shifted to newer, more recent tragedies. But Vidal utterly refused to let this go. She had made a solemn promise standing in that hotel room. Julian Moreau would face justice. He was out there somewhere, and eventually he would slip up, make a mistake, get comfortable. And when he did, Vidal would be patiently waiting. "He's out there," she said to the empty office. "And we will find him." 3 days later, her phone rang with the one call that would change everything. December 18, 2020. 6 months to the day after Serafina's murder. Detective Vidal was meticulously finishing paperwork when her phone rang at 3:15 p.m. Unknown number, Swiss Alps area code. She answered. Detective Vidal, Lyon PD. The voice on the other end was male, nervous, speaking quickly in heavily accented French. "I think I know where Julian Moreau is. There's this guy at my logging camp who looks exactly like him. Different name, but it's him. I'm certain of it." Vidal sat up straighter, her adrenaline spiking. "What is your name, sir?" The caller hesitated. "I'd rather not say, but I work at Mont Blanc Timber in Chamonix, France. There's a guy here who started in July, calls himself Dominique Dubois, but it's Julian Moreau. Same height, same build, same eyes. He grew a heavy beard and his hair is longer, but it's him. Vidal asked for detailed specifics. Night shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Kept entirely to himself. Paid cash for everything. Vidal thanked the caller and immediately contacted Europol Special Agent Dubois. Cherry, I think we just found him. Within an hour, Dubois had coordinated with the local gendarmerie and Europol field agents in the region. Surveillance began that night. Officers positioned themselves outside Mont Blanc Timber at 10:30 p.m. At 10:52 p.m., a man matching Julian's description walked up to the camp entrance. Beard grown out, scraggly, hair longer, pulled back in a small ponytail. He had lost weight, looked gaunt, but the fundamental facial structure was an exact match. One of the surveillance officers zoomed in with a telephoto lens, captured clear, high-resolution images, and instantly transmitted them back to Vidal in Lyon. She compared the photos to Julian's old driver's license, his wedding photos, his Interpol file. Same bone structure, same nose, same intense eyes. It was him. Dubois agreed. They had their fugitive. Local police pulled Julian's employment records. He had applied under the name Dominique Dubois with a fake ID and a fake national insurance number. He had been working there for 5 months, collecting paychecks cashed at remote check cashing stores, living completely off the grid. Surveillance teams followed Julian when his shift ended at 7 a.m. on December 19th. He took a local bus to a dilapidated, isolated motel on the outskirts of town, the kind that rented by the week and never asked for identification. Room 107, ground floor. Officers confirmed he was alone and immediately established a secure perimeter. The arrest plan was set for the following morning, December 20th, 6 a.m., just before Julian would leave for work. The tactical team would move in, surround him in the open, and minimize the risk of a dangerous standoff. December 20th, 2020. 5:58 a.m. The tactical team positioned themselves silently around the motel, officers at every exit. Vidal had flown to Chamonix overnight, absolutely determined to be present for the arrest. She stood safely behind the tactical van, wearing a standard-issue bulletproof vest, watching the door to room 107. At exactly 6 a.m., the door opened. Julian stepped out wearing jeans and a jacket, a backpack over his shoulder, heading toward the bus stop. He made it 5 steps before officers surrounded him, weapons drawn. Julian Moreau, you are under arrest. Get on the ground now. Julian froze instantly. For a single split second, Vidal thought he might attempt to run, but then his shoulders visibly sagged. His face registered a chilling, profound resignation, and he slowly raised his hands. I am not armed. I will comply. He dropped to his knees, then lay face down on the cold pavement. Officers moved in, handcuffed him, and searched him thoroughly for weapons. Nothing. They pulled him to his feet and read him his rights. Julian said absolutely nothing, just stared straight ahead with that same blank, empty expression. The tactical team searched room 107. The room was sparse, almost identical to his organized apartment in Lyon. One duffel bag with clothes, a fake ID in the name Dominique Dubois, a burner phone with no stored contacts, 3,000 euros in cash hidden in the mattress, no personal items, no photos, no evidence of any remorse. Vidal watched Julian through the one-way glass during processing. He sat motionless, handcuffed, face expressionless. No tears, no explanations, no emotion whatsoever. Extradition paperwork was processed within hours. Vidal personally escorted Julian on the flight back to Lyon that evening. She sat across the aisle from him. He stared out the window the entire 4-hour flight, never spoke, never asked questions, never once acknowledged her presence. The media caught wind of the arrest before the plane even landed. By the time they touched down at Lyon's airport at 11 p.m., news vans lined the perimeter. Breaking news: Julian Moreau captured after 6-month manhunt. The perp walk happened at midnight. Julian was led from the police transport to the station entrance, cameras flashing violently, reporters shouting questions he didn't acknowledge. He kept his head down, shuffling in ankle chains. Inside, he was formally charged: first-degree murder, first-degree sexual assault, burglary, fleeing to avoid prosecution. Bail hearing was set for the following morning. The prosecutor argued vehemently that he was a demonstrated flight risk who had successfully evaded capture for 6 months. Defense requested bail anyway. The judge denied it immediately. Julian Moreau would remain in custody until trial. No bond. Too dangerous. Flight risk proven beyond any doubt. December 21, 2020. Julian's first court appearance. He pleaded not guilty to all charges, standing in an orange jumpsuit before a packed courtroom. Tobias sat in the gallery, flanked by family, staring at the back of Julian's head with a cold hatred and disbelief. The judge set a trial date, March 2021, 3 months away. Justice delayed, but finally within Tobias's reach. March 2, 2021. The Lyon City Circuit Court was packed by 7 a.m., 2 hours before proceedings began. Media vans lined the street outside, reporters doing live stand-ups for morning news programs. The trial of Julian Moreau begins today in what's being called one of the most disturbing cases of betrayal in recent memory. Inside, spectators filled every seat. Tobias sat stoically in the front row with his parents, Serafina's Tante Cecile, and Isabel. Across the aisle, Julian's mother sat alone, looking small and utterly broken. Jury selection had taken 3 difficult days, complicated by the massive publicity. Finding 12 people who hadn't heard about the wedding night murder proved nearly impossible. Finally, a jury was seated, 6 men, 6 women, ranging in age from 25 to 68. District Attorney Solange Dubois led the prosecution, a 15-year veteran known for her methodical, devastating approach. The defense fell to public defender Pierre Santos, tasked with defending a man whose guilt seemed an absolute certainty. Dubois's opening statement was direct and completely devastating. Julian Moreau planned this crime. He obsessed over Serafina Grant for 2 years. He meticulously documented his obsession in a journal. He attended her wedding as her best man. And hours later, he murdered her. The evidence will prove beyond any doubt that Julian Moreau is guilty of first-degree murder. Santos countered with the only viable strategy available. Julian Moreau suffers from severe mental illness. His capacity to truly understand his actions was profoundly diminished. This is a tragedy born of delusion, not a calculated crime. Week 1 focused relentlessly on forensic evidence. DNA expert Dr. Valerie Munier explained how genetic markers function. The DNA found at the crime scene precisely matches Julian Moreau's profile. The probability of this DNA belonging to anyone else is 1 in 950 billion. Security footage was shown on large screens throughout the courtroom. Time-stamped video of Julian entering the elevator at 11:20 p.m., pressing the button for the 4th floor, exiting at 11:22 p.m., then returning at 11:35 p.m., shirt disheveled. The 15-minute window lined up perfectly with the time of Serafina's death. Week 2 brought the witnesses. Tobias took the stand on Monday, wearing a dark suit, his face gaunt from months of grief. Dubois guided him through the evening, the wedding, the reception, leaving Serafina to meet the groomsmen, returning to find her on the floor. His voice broke multiple times. Then came cross-examination. Santos tried to suggest Tobias had argued with Serafina, that perhaps he had returned earlier than claimed. Tobias's composure shattered. "He was my brother. I trusted him with everything. He stood next to me at my wedding, and then he killed my wife." The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Isabel testified Tuesday, describing Serafina's overwhelming happiness that day. There were no signs of trouble. She was radiant. She was completely in love. The groomsmen testified Wednesday, each confirming Julian's extended absence from the bar, his return looking visibly disheveled. The bartender confirmed the timeline matched exactly. Every witness built the same damning picture. Julian had opportunity, access, and motive. Week 3 was the most difficult to watch. Prosecutor Dubois read entries from Julian's journal aloud. April 14, 2018. Met her tonight. Tobias got in the way. December 18, 2019. He proposed. Should have been my ring on her finger. This isn't over. June 1, 2020. Last chance to show her the truth. The jury heard 2 years of chilling obsession laid bare. Digital forensics presented hundreds of screenshots Julian had saved. Psychological expert Dr. Theo Renard explained the pattern. This demonstrates obsessive behavior, feelings of deep entitlement, and an inability to accept rejection, classic precursors to violence. The medical examiner testified Friday. Cause of death: blunt force trauma combined with asphyxiation. Injuries consistent with sexual assault. Defensive wounds on the victim's hands. Skin cells under her fingernails matching the defendant's DNA. Time of death: between 11:20 p.m. and 11:40 p.m. Everything matched. Everything pointed directly to Julian Moreau. The defense presented their case the following week. Mental health experts claimed Julian suffered from a delusional disorder, diminished capacity. But the prosecution countered with Julian's methodical planning, his successful ability to flee and evade capture for 6 months, his use of fake identification. That's not diminished capacity. That's calculation. Julian never testified. His lawyers strongly advised against it. He sat at the defense table throughout the trial, blank-faced, showing no emotion as witnesses described his crime and Serafina's family wept in the gallery. March 26. Closing arguments began. Du Bois spoke for 90 minutes, walking the jury through every piece of evidence. This was premeditated murder. Julian Moreau knew exactly what he was doing. He chose to do it. And then he ran. That is not mental illness. That is guilt. Santos made his final, desperate plea. Mental illness doesn't excuse what happened, but it explains it. But the jury's stoic faces showed they were not convinced. Deliberations began at 2 p.m. on March 27. The jury requested to review the security footage, the journal entries, and the DNA evidence. They sent word at 11 a.m. on March 28. They had reached a verdict. The courtroom filled within minutes. Julian was led in wearing his orange jumpsuit, handcuffed. The jury filed in, deliberately avoiding eye contact with Julian. The foreperson stood, an older woman who had been a teacher for 30 years. On the count of first-degree murder, how do you find? Her voice was steady and clear. Guilty. Serafina's family gasped, then openly sobbed. On the count of first-degree sexual assault, how do you find? Guilty. Tobias put his head in his hands. On the count of burglary, how do you find? Guilty. Julian showed no reaction, no tears, no visible emotion, just that same blank, empty stare. The judge thanked the jury, set sentencing for April 15, and ordered Julian remanded to custody. As deputies led him away, he glanced once toward the gallery, his eyes finding Tobias for a fraction of a second. Then he looked away and disappeared through the door, back to his cell, where he would wait for the final trial that would decide the remainder of his life. Dove, The Price of Betrayal. April 15, 2021. The courtroom was quieter than it had been during the trial, but the palpable weight in the air felt heavier. This was sentencing day, the final grim chapter in a case that had held the nation captivated for 10 agonizing months. Julian Moreau sat at the defense table in his orange jumpsuit, handcuffed, face expressionless. Tobias sat in the front row, flanked by family. Judge Catherine Henley entered. We are here for sentencing in the matter of the State of France versus Julian Moreau. Before the sentence could be handed down, the victims' families had the right to speak. Victim impact statements. Serafina's tante Cecile went first, a frail woman in her 70s who had raised Serafina and now buried her far too soon. She walked slowly to the podium, gripping it tightly for support. You stole my grandniece's future. She survived so much in her life, fought so hard to become the woman she was, and you took it all away in 15 minutes. I hope you spend every day for the rest of your life thinking about what you did. Isabel went next. Serafina trusted you. She welcomed you into her life, treated you like family. We all did. And you used that sacred trust to destroy her. You are a monster. You don't deserve to ever speak her name again." She looked directly at Julian. He didn't look back. Then came Tobias. The courtroom went completely silent as he approached the podium. He had prepared notes but left them in his pocket. "Julian, you didn't just kill my wife. You killed my ability to ever trust anyone completely again. You stood next to me at my wedding and smiled while planning what you were going to do to her. I've spent 10 months trying to comprehend how someone I called my brother could commit such an evil act. And I finally realized, I never will." He paused, took a deep, shuddering breath. "I forgive you. Not for you, because you don't deserve forgiveness. But for me, because holding on to this rage will ultimately destroy me the way you destroyed Serafina, and I absolutely refuse to let you take anything else from me." The judge asked Julian if he wished to address the court. His lawyer leaned over, whispered something. Julian shook his head. He had nothing to say. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement of the profound loss. Judge Henley's expression hardened. "Mr. Moreau, stand." Julian stood up. "I have presided over many cases in my 20 years on the bench. This one stands out for its sheer cruelty and staggering betrayal. You violated every principle of trust, friendship, and human decency. You destroyed multiple lives and have shown absolutely no remorse. For the crime of first-degree murder, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For first-degree sexual assault, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole, to run consecutively. For burglary, I sentence you to 20 years, also consecutive. You will never be eligible for parole." The gavel slammed down hard. Julian showed no reaction. He was led out by deputies, disappearing through the door without looking back. Appeals were filed within days. All were later denied. Media coverage concluded with headlines across Europe. "Wedding night killer sentenced to life without parole." The story that had dominated news cycles for months finally had its definitive ending. But for Tobias and Serafina's family, the difficult, painstaking work of healing was only just beginning. Tobias started therapy, grief counseling that helped him slowly process the intense trauma. By the end of 2021, Tobias made the difficult decision to leave Lyon. Too many painful memories. He relocated to Montreal, Canada, took a job with a new company, and started fresh in a city where no one knew his entire story. He established the Serafina's Legacy Fund, a foundation that actively supported domestic violence victims and assault survivors. He spoke at events, sharing Serafina's story, passionately advocating for awareness about the predators who skillfully hide in plain sight. Serafina's family created a major scholarship fund in her name for child psychology students at the University of Lyon. Every year, a student passionate about helping at-risk youth received funding to continue Serafina's vital mission. Julian Moreau was sent to Centre Pénitentiaire de Saint-Martin, a maximum security prison in the French Alps. Known as the wedding killer, he became a target almost immediately. Julian was attacked twice in his first 6 months. After the second incident, prison officials moved him to protective custody. He spent 23 hours a day in a single cell. No visitors. His mother tried once in 2022 but couldn't bring herself to go through with it. He existed in utter isolation, serving a sentence that would only conclude with his death. Tobias's life slowly began to rebuild itself. In 2023, he met someone, a woman who knew his history and loved him unconditionally anyway. They married in a quiet, private ceremony. They had a daughter in 2024, named Elodie. Tobias still visited Serafina's grave every June 15th, the anniversary of her death and their wedding day. He brought fresh flowers, stood in silence. "I hope you're proud of me. I hope you know I never forgot you." He would never fully heal. That kind of devastating loss doesn't simply disappear, but he learned to carry it, to live alongside the grief instead of being consumed by it. Serafina deserved to live. She deserved to grow old, to raise children, to help the vulnerable kids she worked so tirelessly to save. Julian Moreau deserves to be forgotten. But Serafina, she deserves to be fiercely remembered, not merely as a victim, but as the incredible, radiant person she was. Thank you for watching. If this story deeply moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more true crime documentaries that meticulously honor victims and relentlessly demand justice. Remember their names. Remember their stories.